Before we turn to the legislation before us today, I want to take a moment to acknowledge Russia's invasion of Ukraine and how Putin has used energy as a weapon to gain leverage over our European allies. One thing that hasn't been talked about as much is that during this time of war, the United States is still importing more than 500,000 barrels per day of crude oil and other petroleum products from Russia, with imports up over 20% in 2021 over 2020. To me, it makes no sense at all for us to rely on energy from a country that is actively engaging in acts of war against a freedom-seeking democracy in Ukraine when we are blessed with an abundant energy resources right here in America. There's no reason why the United States should not be totally energy independent, or at the very least trading with our allies where we need to. This is the only way to ensure our energy security. It is hypocritical for us to ask others to do what we can do for ourselves. And that's asking the OPEC plus, if you will, when it comes to producing energy that we and our allies need. It's time for the administration to take a strong action to unleash American energy, up to and including banning Russian oil imports at a time when they are attacking our allies. Our oil and gas industry partners also need to come to the table and do the right thing for our country and the consumers that rely on their product. We are going to continue talking about these issues in the coming days and weeks because energy security and energy independence must be top of mind for all of us. But for today, our hearing will focus on 7 energy bills, 5 of which are bipartisan. Our agenda is short today, in large part because we did a lot of good work earlier in this Congress, and many of my colleagues' bills were included in whole or in part in a bipartisan infrastructure bill. The bills on the agenda today pertain to advancing the Department of Energy's cutting-edge research and development programs and infrastructure, as well as relating to managing Department of Energy funds, functions, and authorities. I'd like to thank my colleague, Senator Barrasso, for working with me on 2 of these bills, the DOE Science for the Future Act, together with Senators Durbin and Blackburn, and also the Fission for the Future Act. The DOE Science for the Future Act authorizes fundamental research and development activities performed by scientists at the Department of Energy, the national labs, universities, and private companies to advance our understanding of the atom, the cell, the Earth system, and the universe. These scientific endeavors involve the most advanced scientific instruments in the world, from the fastest computers to the brightest light sources, and so much more. The Office of Science is a critical piece of the United States' ability to advance human knowledge of the sciences and in carrying out the mission. It advances a critical and ultimately nonpartisan aspect of our society. We also expanded the ways the DOE's established program to stimulate competitive research, or EPSCoR, for short, can support universities in states like mine, West Virginia, and Wyoming, and New Mexico, and many others, to boost our competitive research capabilities everywhere, not just in elite schools. West Virginia is one of 24 EPSCoR states, most of which are represented on this committee, where EPSCoR funds have been critical for advancing fundamental university research, including at our own West Virginia University. The House included their version of an Office of Science reauthorization in the America Competes bill, and we look forward to working out any differences there might be in conference soon so that the China package can get to the President's desk. The House bill also included Senator Lujan's bill, which is on our agenda today, to fund deferred maintenance, infrastructure needs, and updates for our national labs. I appreciate Senator Lujan's leadership on the national labs and his partnership in ensuring they are treated as the crown jewels that they are of our nation's research and innovation ecosystem. I would also like to bring attention to the Fission for the Future Act, which Ranking Member Barrasso and I introduced in December. The bill directs the Secretary to work with communities with retiring or retired fossil generation facilities to determine the feasibility of constructing advanced nuclear power plants. This bill is an important building block to assist in the economic revitalization of communities providing reliable baseload electricity and opportunities to attract industry to produce advanced materials, hydrogen, and other non-electric applications. Less than a month ago, my home state of West Virginia finally repealed the state ban on nuclear power. I strongly supported this move, in part because of the energy transition has begun over the last few decades and continues to take place. We must be thinking about how to continue providing baseload power. Nuclear is an obvious choice, especially when the advanced technologies that hold such promise and for shuttered coal plant sites that are already connected to the grid. It just makes common sense. So I look forward to discussing this bill today. With that, I'm going to turn to my colleague, Senator Brasso, for his opening remarks.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And like you, before I turn to the subject of today's hearings, I want to say a few words about Ukraine. I'd like to make it clear that this committee stands with the people in the country of Ukraine. We condemn Russia's invasion in the strongest possible terms. Mr. Chairman, as you said yesterday, the United States can and must ramp up domestic energy production and increase access to our abundant resources and technologies to both protect our energy independence and support our allies around the globe. And we in the minority stand ready to ensure that our NATO allies and Ukraine have access to abundant American energy. We in the minority are ready to support additional exports of liquefied natural gas, of crude oil, of coal, and uranium from the United States. The United States has the energy resources to help our allies reduce their dependence on Russian energy. The United States has the energy resources to empower our allies to take tougher action against Russia. We have the energy resources to improve our economy and reduce inflation here at home. We just need the political will here in Washington to make that happen. Now I'll turn to my remarks for the hearing. Mr. Chairman, today we're going to consider 7 bills related to the Department of Energy. I'll limit my comments to the 3 bills which I have introduced and co-sponsored. The first is S-2302, a bill to ensure that the Assistant Secretary will lead the Department's Office of Cybersecurity, Energy Security, and Emergency Response. In March of last year, I, along with a bipartisan group of senators on this committee, wrote to the Secretary, urging her to assign an Assistant Secretary to lead the Office of Cybersecurity. We explained that the last administration assigned an Assistant Secretary to head this office. We also explained that the role of the office would be diminished if a Senate-confirmed official did not lead it. 2 months later, criminal hackers based in Eastern Europe stole data which led to the shutdown of the Colonial Pipeline. The shutdown caused gasoline and diesel fuel shortages. Prices spiked along the East Coast. More recently, the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security warned Americans to expect cyber attacks from Russian-backed actors. We were warned again, the senators were, last night by the chairman of the Department of Homeland Security. Despite these developments, the President has not nominated an Assistant Secretary to lead the Cybersecurity Office. The Department's latest reorganization plan also indicates we will not get such a nominee. My bill, which Senator Risch has co-sponsored, is companion legislation to a bipartisan bill that has already passed the House. There's no good reason for the Secretary to diminish the role of cybersecurity in that office. It's time for the Senate to act. The second bill is S-3428, Chairman Manchin's Fission of the Future Act. I'm the lead co-sponsor of the bill. It would provide financial assistance to states and other entities seeking to deploy advanced nuclear reactors. A growing number of states recognize that advanced nuclear reactors are a critical part of our energy future. My home state of Wyoming will be home to TerraPower's first natrium reactor. The state of Washington will host X-Energy's first advanced reactor. This bill will help states with licensing, developing, and construction of these reactors and related supply chain infrastructure. I've also co-sponsored S-3699, Senator Manchin's bill to reauthorize the Department's Office of Science. This bill will significantly expand EPSCAR, which is the established program to stimulate competitive research. For decades, the Department has overlooked research universities in rural states. This bill will help ensure universities like the University of Wyoming better compete for the Department's research dollars. The bill also establishes new basic research programs on carbon and rare earth mineral extraction, underground storage of carbon dioxide, as well as nuclear energy. These new programs will help ensure that the Office of Science is conducting research to promote all types of American energy. In addition, the bill will help address our needs and our nation's needs for medical isotopes. Medical isotopes play a critical role in diagnosis and in treating of diseases like cancer. For far too long, we have been dependent on Russia and other countries for our supply of these isotopes. Sanctions may jeopardize our supply. This bill will boost domestic production of these isotopes and reduce our foreign dependence. Finally, the bill will reduce the risk that adversaries like China will steal research funded by the Office of Science. The bill will impose penalties on funding recipients who knowingly violate the department's protocols to protect American research. I want to thank the chairman for his leadership and his willingness to work with me on two of these important bills, and I hope he can also join me in supporting the third. I also want to thank our witness, Dr. Richmond. I look forward to your testimony. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Barrasso. Now we're going to turn to our witness for today's hearing, the Honorable Dr. Jerry Richmond, Undersecretary for Science and Innovation at the Department of Energy, and we want to welcome you back. You may start.
Great, thank you very much. And can I also say thank you for your vote of confidence in confirming me for this position too. So I think I'm thanking you.
Now you got to prove your value.
I know. Now the hard stuff starts. Well, thank you also for letting me be here today, and distinguished members of the committee, Chairman Manchin, Ranking Member Barrasso. It is with great pleasure that I join you today to represent the Department of Energy at this hearing, and particularly the Office of Science. As members of this committee know, the DOE Office of Science is the cornerstone of the research enterprise in the United States. Through basic and use-inspired research and the development and operation of cutting-edge tools, the Office of Science enables advances in areas of science and technology of critical importance to our economic and national security, including a just and equitable clean energy and climate change transition. S3699, to be referred to as the Department of Energy Science for the Future Act of 2022, recognizes and reinforces the importance of the Office of Science and the community of researchers it supports, both at DOE's national laboratories and at U.S. colleges and universities, to advance all the DOE missions, including energy, security, and environmental management. At the same time, the committee, through this legislation, has clearly stated the importance of the Office of Science in addressing a much broader range of science and technology challenges. These challenges include addressing the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic and ensuring the security of the Office of Science-supported research, both of which require close coordination with other federal departments and agencies. This is an ambitious bill, and I commend the committee for its vision. S2232, to be referred to as the Restore and Modernize Our National Laboratories Act of 2021, is, along with the parallel provisions of the DOE Science of the Future Act, a recognition of the foundational importance of the DOE's 17 incredible national laboratories they play in sustaining the U.S. leadership in science and technology and for tackling the most pressing problems of our time today. The national laboratories are known internationally as powerhouses of innovation and are a host to many of the world's leading capabilities for scientific discovery and technology development. As Secretary Granholm describes them, they are the nation's solutions factories. This complex of 17 laboratories has its origins in the Manhattan Project, with some of the labs entering their 8th decade of operation. DOE recognizes that significant investment is required to ensure that the DOE's laboratories are positioned to continue their long history of groundbreaking discoveries. I'm also here today to speak to several additional bills of significance to the DOE. Bill S3428, to be referred to as the Vision of the Future Act of 2022, is a strong statement of support to the Department for continued public-private partnerships to advance demonstration and deployment of next-generation nuclear power concepts. At the same time, the bill aligns with the Department of Energy's justice efforts with consideration for helping disadvantaged communities as we transition towards a carbon-free power sector in decades to come. Bill number S2733, to be referred to as the U.S. Enrichment Corporation Fund Termination and Transfer Act, rescinds the authorization of the U.S. Enrichment Corporation, or USEC Fund, and moves the funds still in its coffers to the General Fund of the Treasury. We look forward to working with Congress on this further also. And finally, House Bill 3119, to be referred to as the Energy Emergency Leadership Act, and S2302, would assign the department's responsibilities in energy sector security and in responding to energy sector emergencies to an assistant secretary at the department. Disruptions to the energy system in the U.S. can have a devastating consequence, and the department's Office of Cybersecurity, Energy Security, and Emergency Response plays an essential role in mitigating the risk of disruptions and responding rapidly when disruptions occur. Executing on this mission requires a team of professionals with the unique training and experience needed to understand and mitigate the risks and respond rapidly when crises do occur. I look forward to discussing the legislation in more depth, and thank you for the opportunity to let me meet with you today.
Well, thank you. Now we'll begin our questions. The Department of Energy's Office of Science and its national labs bring world-class expertise, advanced facilities, infrastructure, resources to address the most pressing challenges the United States face. And the foundational scientific research conducted by the Office of Science is critical to developing these. However, it's important that technologies are allowed to progress through the research cycle from basic research to application, and I guess try to avoid the so-called valley of death. So if you can explain the DOE work to ensure a smooth handoff from the basic science research to application by avoiding that valley?
Yes, thank you very much for that question, Senator Manchin, because that's what I took on the minute I got confirmed. This is unprecedented times for us to be able to make the kind of solutions that we need to make in order to address the climate issues and actually security issues today. When I came into this role, I had much more experience with the Office of Science, and I've spent a lot of time now understanding more the applied areas. I've also been able to understand better this valley of death and what we need to do in order to fill that up so it can easily be passed across. In particular, I believe that the key players in this are really our DOE laboratories, because they are really the incubators for a lot of these activities that go from basic to applied. And so especially the handoff happens much more easily at our laboratories. That said, what I've been doing in the Department of Energy leadership is working together to more closely align those program officers and leaders in the Office of Science with the applied areas, with weekly meetings together, with bringing together ways at which they can coordinate across programs in ways that it's never been done before. I've been meeting with all of the national laboratory directors individually and also in groups to talk about how they can make this gap shorten to eventually disappear. They are all on board. I've also been meeting with small groups of the research officers from each of the national laboratories, because they're the ones that really have the tendrils down into their laboratories to understand what's going on, and they are right on board with this too. And so by working at various levels, I believe that we're starting to make progress in bridging these gaps, especially with our programs, our new Earth shots, the 3 that have been announced. And those require us to move across all the way to deployment. And so I've spent a lot of time with really talented people working in all these areas, and particularly the Earth shots, in being able to pull people together. And
how's it going? Do you feel like we're accomplishing?
Huh?
Do you feel like you're accomplishing?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
Actually, I do.
People are coming together?
Yeah, I do. Well, you know, you have to have a carrot and a stick, right?
I understand. Let me throw this at you, too. Senator Barrasso and I introduced the Fission for Future Act. As you know, the recognition of the value of using advanced nuclear reactors to repurpose coal and other fossil generating plants for nuclear power generation. Senator Barrasso, Wyoming has one on their, I think, in the building stage, right? Okay. They're planning and building, okay.
Yeah.
We just changed the law in West Virginia to allow
know.
I know. I'm as happy as you are.
Oh, my goodness.
Thank you. It gives a lot of opportunities. So can you tell me how you all support this legislation and what you're doing to bring this to fruition?
Yes, so as the legislation highlights, there are some key issues for advanced nuclear outside of electric applications. And so that includes industrial decarbonization, hydrogen production, isotope production, desalination, and more and more and more. Right. So it's not just about energy,
Correct.
There's all these other things going on too. And so what I've been doing is working both with the nuclear energy side in the applied areas, closely with the nuclear physics side, to get them together, and now they're collaborating with each other across in order to help to translate, to understand in the basic science side, to understand what the issues are that the NE side needs to be able to get worked out before you can make progress, and then also getting them, the nuclear physics side, to look more carefully about how what they're doing can be related to more in the
Your
vision area.
communications people, if you would, consider basically putting out a statement saying the value chain that's involved, not just in electricity, but things you just talked about, what we can do with that reactor, the hydrogen, things of that sort, because there's an awful lot of applications and opportunities that people just don't know. They just don't know enough in the scientific value. So anything you can do to enhance that, putting a statement out, not just for my state, but for all states that have had a transition going on from their coal-fired plants into a new technology would be very, very helpful.
Great, will do,
Okay.
will do.
With that, we'll turn to Senator Barrasso for his questions.
Well, thanks so much, Mr. Chairman. And kind of following up with this, in terms of nuclear and uranium, the United States has 93 operating commercial nuclear reactors. We're almost completely reliant on imports of uranium to fuel the reactors. About half of that uranium comes from Russia and its allies, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan. So in 2020, Congress gave the department $75 million to establish a strategic uranium reserve. The department is yet to purchase any uranium from U.S. producers, and in light of Russia's invasion of Ukraine and our interest in sanctioning Russia, does the department now have any plans to accelerate its purchases of uranium?
Thank you, Senator Barrasso, for that question. It's certainly an urgent one today, and with this invasion, it's made all of these issues that we're having discussions in the Department of Energy even more urgent. So at this point, what we, folks in NNSA as well as in the nuclear energy area are looking for other sources in which we can partner also with our allies in this area, and also different ways that we can get different sources of uranium so we're not dependent on Russia. I'd be happy to get back to you more with details on that, because it is a rapidly changing picture.
Yeah, there's a sense of urgency that we feel, and I appreciate your interest
Yes,
in continuing.
I'm happy to get back to you on that.
The next issue is the advanced nuclear reactors. They need a specific type of fuel of high-assay, low-enriched uranium. Currently, there are only two sources of high-assay, low-enriched uranium. One is Russia. The other is the Department of Energy. So unless the department acts swiftly, our advanced reactors are going to be, again, dependent upon Russia. It's the same urgency you talked about in the answering to the first question. Is the department willing to produce high-assay, low-enriched uranium and make it available for our advanced reactors?
So thank you again for that question, too. It's, life is changing quickly as we speak today. But we recognize that HALEU is the fuel needed for most of our reactor developers to fuel their reactors, including 9 of the 10 awards under our RDP use HALEU, like TerraPower and other demo projects. So the HALEU supply program, we realize, must address enrichment, transportation, storage, chemical conversion, and regulatory elements of the HALEU supply chain. And so the most urgent near-term needs include supporting the ARDP demonstration projects, the X-Energy and Natrium. Until recently, the prevailing assumption was that the initial cores of HALEU for both ARDP projects would be supplied by Russia, as you point out, under the provisions of the Russian Suspension Agreement administered by the Commerce Department. So NE is in partnership with NNSA programs, are exploring feasible options to address this issue, but any solution will require a substantial and sustained source of government funding on the order of provisions included in the House-passed bill, Back Better bill, with $500 million for HALEU supply, along with support from industry, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and other stakeholders. So we're working on it.
In terms of that finance, would it be helpful if the department had the authority to use some of the money remaining in the U.S. Enrichment Corporation Fund for this purpose?
So I don't know the answer to that at this point, but I'd be happy to get back to you.
Great. I want to ask about research. As Undersecretary of Science and Innovation, you oversee the Office of Science. The Office of Science oversees 10 of our 17 national laboratories. Can you tell us how many citizens of the People's Republic of China work at our national labs?
Thank you for that question. I don't actually have the number with me. I can certainly get back to you on that.
I just want to point out that according to the department, there are over 5,700 citizens of the People's Republic of China working at our U.S. national labs. Do you know whether the People's Republic of China allows citizens to have dual citizenship with the United States? They don't. It's okay. They don't. Just I'm concerned because
Oh, no.
is there any evidence to suggest that the Chinese government allows its citizens to work at our national labs without the government's prior knowledge or consent?
That is certainly a big concern to us, and one that we have been working on with other agencies also, in order to make sure that we have the strictest protocols in place in order to check who's working in our laboratory, while also being careful that we're not overextending our protections and capturing people that really are completely innocent. So those are ongoing concerns, and we hope that by working with other agencies, we can develop a procedure and protocol and strategy that is across all the agencies. And so the concern that we have with regards to this being a focus on the Office of Science is that it really needs to be, it's a very serious issue, but it needs to be taken up more broadly with the other agencies, and I guarantee you that's what we're working on right now.
And just to end, and I won't really ask for your response to here, that it's just that, after our secure briefings last night and classified settings and concern about cybersecurity, it just seems to make a lot of common sense that the Secretary would go ahead and put into a position, a confirmed position, to oversee the Office of Cybersecurity in the Department of Energy.
And I can understand your concerns for that. We are also concerned about making certain that we have someone in that position that is has the qualifications to be able to carry out the duty. We believe that Push Kumar, who's in that position right now, is excellent in that area. We also are concerned about the fact that if there is, if it requires Senate confirmation, then it may delay our ability to have someone of that quality in place all the time. And so that is a concern for us. On the other hand, we know that you need to be able to question whether you think the person is doing the job and able to do that job, and we believe that you have mechanisms to be able to do that without having to be confirmed. So our choice would be not to have that a confirmed position, but it's more about the fact having somebody in place that's qualified, that's continuous, and not political.
Thank you.
We'll bring him in. We can bring him in.
Oh, yeah.
We can question him even if he's acting.
Yeah.
Sure.
He's really good.
Mr. Chairman, I want to start and just say a few words about what lessons we should be learning from Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and in particular their weaponization of their hydrocarbon reserves. I certainly agree with you that it makes no sense to rely on Russian oil and gas. But the solution is not more reliance on dangerous fossil fuels that are driving climate change and irresponsibly imperiling the economic future of our children and grandchildren. The solution is to embrace technologies that exist today and make climate imperiling fossil fuels irrelevant. Clean electricity, electrification, and in particular heat pumps can literally free Western Europe from the shackles of Russian oil and gas. And this is a path that can also neuter Russia's economic leverage over Western Europe and the world, and is the only path that really frees American consumers from the devastating price swings that are so inherent to hydrocarbon commodities. So I think we need to be spending a lot more time looking at how we accelerate that transition, particularly in Western Europe, so as to make things like Nord Stream 2 completely unnecessary. And we should be looking at industrial policy, because I believe that the United States of America should be manufacturing those technologies, in particular heat pumps. DOE just announced an organizational realignment to ensure that the department has the structure needed to effectively spend the $62 billion provided in the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Energy Act of 2020. Last year, you were sworn in as Undersecretary of Science and Energy, and after the reorganization, you will be Undersecretary for Science and Innovation. Talk to me about how your newly defined role fits into the administration's larger strategy to meet the target of achieving net zero no later than 2050.
Great. Thank you, Senator, for that question.
And if you
Because-
want to opine about heat pumps, you can do that too.
Yes, actually, we have one at home. Thank you very much. When I came on board and got started in the position, I learned of this reorganization, and so the person that held my position temporarily, Kathleen Hogan, is now the person that's sitting in the position of taking over the bill. She and I, we talk about being connected at the hip. We have been working very, very closely to make sure that because she had been working a lot in the applied science area, not so much in the basic science area, and now she's moved over into that role. And we both believe that in order for us to succeed, that we must be working closely. So, for example, briefings that she has, biweekly briefings that she has with her different units, I sit in on. She sits in on briefings that happen in my space, and we work together to make sure that the transition from the very fundamental work is being passed all the way through. That said, you can't just pass the knowledge and expect it to be launched into the deployment area without some problems, because you discover problems that then have to come all the way back. So if we don't keep this string of information flow going back and forth, it's not going to work. And so what's good about the position that we're in now is I can oversee the unit of the fundamental and applied, while then working with her on in the deployment area. And so we have programs that stretch all the way across that we all keep an eye on, as well as those that go all the way, our Earth shots would pretty much go up to the deployment. And so it's actually well coordinated also, because some of the people that were working in the applied space are now in the deployment space. So they're heavily connected with the people in that area also. I think it's just been really brilliant the way that was designed, and I can't take credit for that because I came into it. I think it's a really good plan.
I do think it's important for us to sort of bake that continuity into the organization of the agency over time, because historically we've always had the focus on basic R&D, but applied science, and in particular, if we don't commercialize these technologies, we're really not doing our economy any favors. That's right. And so having that continuity all the way through the process, and having the kind of approach that we've seen from this administration, even in the DOE loan office, to deploy, that's where our constituents see feel the jobs of the future when things get deployed in their own communities and there's new hope and new jobs. So whatever you can do to bake that in to the agency over time and really show the successes that are capable there, I think it will serve not only DOE but the country in the long term.
That's the hope. That's the plan. And you know what's really cool about the national labs is that some of those in the more applied areas have been going towards deployment anyway. And so it really, by I would say, cementing that into the framework of the labs, in addition to the Department of Energy with the deployment, is we got to do it. We just got to do it.
Thank you, Senator. And now we have Senator Cassidy by Webb.
Okay, thank you. Let me just respond a little bit to Senator Heinrich's point. I hope Senator Heinrich's not suggesting that we don't attempt to increase oil and gas production in the immediate near term in order to help the Europeans and ourselves off of the dependence upon Russia, denying Russia the income they need to fund Putin's war machine. We can all agree that long term there's things we must do, but near term it is clear what we must do is increase supply of oil and gas to take away the volatility of the pricing that is resulting because of Putin's war. I'll just make that point. Dr. Richmond, you clearly bring enthusiasm to your job, so I appreciate that. Thank you very much. I would like to focus right now on the Coastal Zone Research Initiative of the Office of Science Reauthorization for just a minute. And as you might imagine, I'm from Louisiana. The Gulf Coast is one of the regions highlighted. And the program's direction is to enhance the understanding of coastal ecosystems The director is to develop models to analyze the ecological, biogeochemical, hydrological, physical, and human processes that interact in coastal zones. When I look at your bio, it seems as if this would be something that you have an interest in. And I spoke about this concept to Dr. Berhe during her nomination. How can the work under the Coastal Zone Research Initiative be used to better understand the carbon storage value of coastal zones and wetlands? And related, what other programs in this reauthorization could be used to establish carbon sequestration values of ecosystem restoration? By the way, we're told there needs to be a kind of dollar value, if you will, related to the net amount of carbon sequestration that would result with coastal restoration. So it seems as if that science has to be developed so that if we wanted a negative carbon offset, everybody would be sure about the values that we're using. Now I'll turn it back to you.
Well, our coastal areas, your region of the country, are just incredibly important. And I think that in terms of what we're doing in the Office of Science and BER is addressing exactly where you want to go with this. Let me say that what we need to do more of, and we are currently working on, is improving our computational models to be able to predict things in the future, and this is really important. And so tying in our BER activities with regards to soils and coastal issues, along with our computational methods, which are in OSCAR, are allowing us to develop models that can give us predictive values for not only cost, but also damaging effects of climate change on our ecosystem in these areas. So this is a
Now, let me ask, because what I'm specifically told is that there has to be some sort of this is the net amount of carbon that would be sequestered if you rebuild a hectare of coastline. How far along are we in terms of establishing that model?
So this is not my area of expertise. It's more Berhe's, Dr. Berhe's. But I'd be happy to get back to you on that issue. It's just not.
Sounds great. Let me ask you about something else. I've been very interested in the use of blockchain and artificial intelligence in order to track emissions and other such things. And the bipartisan infrastructure bill can trace its energy provisions back to this committee's actions last summer, which included requiring DOE to publish a study within a year of the use of digital tools in analyzing and addressing climate change and the impacts. Are you aware of the study? And do you anticipate the Office of Science contributing to the report, considering its extensive history in AI, supercomputing, and other digital needs?
So in that area, I do believe that the Office of Science is working very hard on this, particularly OSCAR. Area, but on the other hand, I don't know the state of that report right now, but I'd be happy to get back to you on the details of that.
Sounds great. And then let me just kind of talk about carbon oxide sequestration research and geologic computing initiative. The proposed legislation would continue to invest in the research into computing that can identify pore spaces for carbon sequestration. How can the increased funding help us to better understand and, if you will, transfer the EPA to help expedite the permitting and siting of carbon sequestration wells?
Well, I think any progress that we make with regards to increasing our computational capacity using AI, and particularly to increase our capabilities for resolution so that we can actually be looking at specific areas in order to do the predictions, is very important. And I know that that's not only in the Office of Science, but it's also in many of our, in terms of their thinking, but it's also being instituted at a number of our different national laboratories. They put that as very much as a priority with regards to being able to do those simulations to do the predictions. And this is a work in progress. You know, the Office of Science is doing very basic research to build up this capacity. And so it's sort of flying the plane while you're building it, but we're trying to get as much results out as we can while we're also building that plane. So stay tuned.
Thank you, Dr. Richmond. I yield.
Senator Cortez Masto.
Thank you. Dr. Richmond, it's great to see you. Thank you for joining us. Let me ask you this. In your written testimony, you touched on some of the values and opportunities that increased funding for EBSCOR could provide the department and our country overall. And you reiterated the department's commitment to ensuring that the next generation of scientists and engineers are more inclusive and diverse. So can you please speak to existing workforce needs in the energy sector, as well as the ways that DOE is currently seeking to enhance geographic diversity in research through initiatives like EBSCOR?
Well, thank you for that question. EBSCOR is a really, really important program. And the Office of Science has a long history, as you probably know, of supporting research at institutions represented and in the federal R&D landscape, including HBCUs and other minority-serving institutions through EBSCOR. It also recognizes the great value to increase the competitiveness and of underrepresented institutions, of which we have many really good ones, and is committed to increasing financial assistance to them, including those in EBSCOR-eligible jurisdictions. What needs to, what I find when I go talk at institutions that don't have much federal funding, and many of them are in EBSCOR states that I have in my career, a lot of the problem is that the PIs at the faculty at those institutions really don't, oftentimes are an institution that don't have the resources to put together a research office, or the research office is pretty limited, so their ability to get knowledge on how to apply for grants and how to get the funding and the kind of grantsmanship you need to do can be holding them back. And so what the Office of Science has been doing in DOE in general, in these COVID times in particular, is having many webinars in order to reach out to them. So it's not only the money, but it's being able to recruit and capture those that have the ideas but are afraid to apply, or they apply once and they get turned down and then they quit, which anyone that's experienced at this knows that you get turned down a lot and you just keep doing it. And so I think it's a combination of being able to have funding in our EBSCOR state institutions, but also to be able to get the knowledge to them and encouragement. And I think many of our program officers in the Office of Science are very good at this. It's just that we can always improve and be better. But I think it's important for the institutions also to recognize, to kind of push their PIs to keep trying, because we are merit-based. We make decisions based on merit, in addition to making certain that we are funding diverse institutions in other parts of the country besides just the Bay Area, Boston, and Boston and
Well,
Chicago.
as an EBSCOR state, I agree with you wholeheartedly. Let me ask you this, because S3699 provides important funding for EBSCOR programs. And do you think that the grants that are opportunities in this legislation, as well as the fellowships, will help to enhance and further promote diversity in STEM?
Well, let me just give you what we have now in terms of 2021. The total support to universities in EBSCOR-eligible jurisdictions was $125 million in the Office of Science, or 12% of the total support to provide it to universities, and $25 million of that total was provided through DOE EBSCOR programs. So we already give a lot of money to our universities in EBSCOR states that don't come through the regular EBSCOR program. So what I do have concerns about is establishing a quota in terms of a number that we need to meet for a percentage of the total research funding, because that would not be compatible with our principles of merit-based allocation of research funding, but also it would take a big chunk out of our merit-based research funding that's already tight for funding. So I think a balanced approach and continuing to work and to find more of those institutions in EBSCOR states where we can pull more people in is important, but not so keen on sort of a quota that's there. But I do think that we have a lot of incredibly talented young people in our EBSCOR states that are in remote areas at small colleges and universities. And I believe that one of the most important programs that we have to grab them are actually in our summer internships that we have at our DOE laboratories. I hear stories all the time about someone like myself that came from a fairly remote part of Kansas originally and went to a DOE lab in college, and so be it, here I am. But so I'm passionate about making certain that we're grabbing the talent that's out there, giving those, can I call them kids, the confidence that they can be successful, to be full participants because we critically need them right now like we've never needed them before.
Yeah, thank you. Dr. Richmond, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Senator Cortez Masto. Senator Lankford. Okay. See if Senator Lankford is coming to the, if we don't hear from him, I know he's online and been participating. Let me ask you while we're getting Senator Lankford lined up, specific on medical isotopes. You know, medical isotopes are elements which doctors use to diagnose and treat diseases like cancer. As you know, the United States is dependent on other countries, including Russia, for most medical isotopes. We lose access to these isotopes, American lives could be lost. Long said that we need to stop relying on Russia for uranium. I asked about that earlier. I think the same can be said for medical isotopes. Will you discuss how our bill improves our nation's ability to produce medical isotopes?
Oh, thank you for that question. It's really important. It's a really important bill because, and we fully support it because it's absolutely true. These isotopes are so key to a lot of the things that we do in medicine and other things. So anything that we can do to reduce our dependence in this area, as well as in a lot of the critical materials, is urgent. And unfortunately, it was urgent before, but now people understand how urgent it needs to be as we are looking to limit the sources of some of these from other countries.
I'd like to ask you a bit about EPSCoR because both Senator Manchin and I come from states that qualify, as a number of the other senators, members of this committee do. This has become an interesting topic of concern of people here. And, you know, Congress created this program, the established program to stimulate competitive research, to broaden the geographic distribution of federal research funding. There are about 25 SCAR states, 15 of which are represented on this committee.
I know.
We have a map right here, Nevada, right there. You know, New Mexico, Oklahoma. That's this committee.
A lot of great states. A lot of great states.
And with great institutions, a great
And
opportunity.
great institutions, too. I agree.
Yeah. So less than 2% of the Office of Science's research budget goes to universities in all of these states. Less than 2% for universities in 25 states when we take a look at the money. And Senator Cortez Masto, who is here, has been part of those discussions. Is it fair to say that the Office of Science can and should do more to build research capacity at research universities in these EPSCAR states?
Well, we need to do as much as we can to build that. I need to check into, I have to trust you on the 2% number because I'm not aware of that number. But that would, if that's the case, then it would cause me concern too. That said, I will take it back to the Office of Science and we'll talk about that more and get back to you.
Because when you talked about your history and where you are now, but where
I know.
you came from.
I know. And I love those states. I've been to all of them, okay? I love those states, including Nevada. I do. So I get it.
And a follow-up, the Office of Science has 6 advisory committees, which collectively include a total of 133 members. Of those 133 members, only 9 come from universities in EPSCoR states, 9 of the 133 from those 25 states. Notably, these 6 advisory committees include just as many members from outside of the United States as members from universities in the EPSCoR states. So what is the Office of Science doing to include more members from universities in EPSCoR states on its advisory committees?
Good question. Thank you for asking that. I think in terms of having advisory board members from, having been on one of those committees and chair of it a number of years ago, I understand to some degree how they're put together. I think it's important for us to have international folks that are on it. But I agree with you. Thank you for those statistics because I was not aware of those. And so I will go back with that message because I think it is really important that we have representation from the EPSCoR states on it.
Well, and part of the role of committees, as the chairman and I continue to say, is sometimes we actually really want the answer, and other times it's to just bring the level of understanding of what's happening out there and what we see and what we hear about at home to the attention of people who are in positions of influence in the various administration. So, thank you.
These committees help to set the agenda for the particular division of the Office of Science. So it is important, and particularly, so I take your message. I take your message back, because it is important that there is that view there, and also the fact that many of your states are very diverse racially, and we want to make sure that that is represented in the committees too.
Senator Cortez Masto.
Thank you. Let me talk a little bit about quantum computing.
Sure.
Yeah, in your written testimony, you underscored existing efforts to further secure the nation's economic and national security through this area. And researchers right now, the University of Nevada, Reno, the Argonne National Lab, and Pacific Northwest National Lab, they received $2.5 million in grants from the DOE to develop a center that designs molecules for QIS applications. From your perspective, how would the DOE Science for the Future Act, or any of the legislation that we're talking about today, build on partnerships like this to ensure that the U.S. continues to be a world leader in fostering new technologies such as quantum superposition? I'm curious your thoughts.
So that's really a great question, and what a hot topic these days, and a very competitive topic too with other countries, particularly China. So in this realm of quantum computing, one of the really hard issues, and I think the funding that went to your state is to address this issue, are the materials. So, you know, when we have normal computers, we've got the silicon chip and it's been etched, and we've got bits and so forth. And with quantum, we have qubits. I'm not going to go into all the details, nor do you need to know the details. All you need to know is that what's really hard, what the big challenge in quantum computing is that what you've got there, the material you've got there to work with, has to be so pristine and perfect with almost, well, no defects, because defects kills the qubits. and that takes incredible material science. Now, today, the model system that's used are diamonds, fabricated diamonds, right? And so, because they can be in a crystalline form, that the number of, can we say, potholes in there are pretty small. And so developing materials that can be so incredibly pure and structured so that they don't kill off, if I can say that, the qubits, is really important. And so it's a huge effort in material science, but it also is, you know, a lot having to do with lasers and intense lasers and short pulse lasers and so forth involved too. But in my mind, it's really this issue of the materials. And we've seen some really cool research come out lately. I believe one study from Argonne that actually is showing some progress in some carbide material. And I get very excited about that because it gets us closer. I can't remember, it was 5 seconds or 5 minutes that the qubit lasted, but it's still making progress. So it's really important that we have an all hands on deck that are people that are interested in qualified working on this, because it's in a very discovery mode before we can move forward in the quantum area. And that means, in many respects, that discovery mode means you can be doing it at a lot of different places, as long as you are capable to be able to test things, like you have your collaboration with Argonne, to be able to test out what you're...
And so would you say that for that reason, it's important for Congress, for us to come to the table with the research and development continuing, because of the opportunities we have here, and it's at the beginning stages, and we need to continue that development and research, correct?
That's right. That's right. But I would say that in a lot of areas, whether it be carbon capture or hydrogen or any of those areas, or, you know, when you're talking about critical minerals, a real problem is separating those critical minerals, whether they be rare earths, from the dirt, you know, and separating it with great purity. And there's just been this cool study that came out this past week where the group is using, Lawrence Livermore National Lab, a group is using a bacterial protein to grab on to rare earths and, you know, and separate them rather than the caustic chemicals you usually use. I mean, is that like too cool? And it really is, because it's just a new way of thinking about things. It's a discovery. Somebody from Penn State was involved too.
Well, Dr. Rich, I just have to say, it's such a pleasure as well to see your passion and enthusiasm for the job and the opportunities around what we're talking about in the science. So thank you. Thank you for, again, answering the questions and being here today as well.
Great.
Senator Hickenlooper.
Dr. Richmond, what a pleasure.
Good to see you.
I believe, according to Mark Kelly, I'm the only scientist, which is to say I had a couple articles published as a geologist in peer-reviewed journals. So Senator Kelly refers to himself as an engineer, which I would argue with. I think there's several.
I like to think that we're all scientists at some level.
One hopes, if being a scientist is careful observation of the world around us and using those observations as the foundation for a better life, then yes, I hope we all are. The Restore and Modernize Our National Laboratories Act calls out for the Office of Science as the specific recipient of at least 1/6 of the bill's funding.
Yeah.
And I certainly, obviously Colorado has a lot of labs, a number of energy labs. I'm a big fan, but also see no reason why other agencies that oversee labs shouldn't also get called out to make sure that we integrate and allocate properly all the funding for research, and that we're getting the maximum benefit and synergy by that integrated funding. Yeah. So do you see any harm in requiring minimum amounts of funding for other DOE agencies in addition to the Office of Science?
You know, this is an important issue because right now we need to be, in my mind, there's a lot of interesting research going on right now, but there's also some really urgent things that we need to do. And the Office of Science has a big role, but so do the applied labs, like in your state with NREL. And so we'd have to go back. I mean, I have to, just getting started with this, I need to understand whether what the minimum should be. But all I can say is we need to have all the labs, if whatever funding can permit, to be able to do what they need to get done in order to work through these fundamental and applied issues as we go to deployment.
I couldn't agree more. But I'll keep following, and because I do think that we have to figure out how we're going to integrate and coordinate all the different funding that we do through the federal government.
Yeah.
I was pleased to see the inclusion of the Emerging Biological Threat Preparedness Research Initiative within the Office of Science in the DOE Science for the Future Act. I think this is exactly what pandemic preparedness is all about, something I've certainly been speaking about for close to a year now. If this bill is enacted, how will DOE prioritize the initiative and work with private sector researchers on the R&D efforts?
Well, you know, they've already made contacts with industry already. So, for example, let me give you a good example, and that is, do you realize that for most all drugs that are commercially created, put out on the market, they have to have an X-ray structure of the crystal structure of it, right? Where are they going to do that, right? Where are you going to do that? You got to do that at a DOE light source. Who else has got a light source? NIH doesn't have a light source. We got the light sources, right? Right?
Sure.
So when you think about the fact that we've already been connecting with companies in that area, in addition to the COVID-related issues, which they're continuing to work on now. But it's really, you know, what I find really exciting, since I've been around a while, so when I reflect back on the Office of Science when I was chair of BSEC many years ago, there was sort of, ooh, got to stay away from the biological stuff because NIH does that stuff. And although you could tinker in it, there was a fear that there would be looked at as the redundancy, when actually it's a true partnership today with regards to working with other agencies through the BRAVE initiative as well as with companies. And the sense of the freedom that I see now of the Office of Science being willing and happy to start working with industry in order to help them along as well as get the ideas of what discoveries still need to be done is a transformation that, again, I welcome, and I've been so happy to see that in my few months that I've been on the post.
Great. Perfect. If you talk to almost any lead researcher in basic science today, they'll tell you, or at least they tell me, that too much of their time is occupied with paperwork, filling out forms, not the research aspect. I've heard concerns from both university institutions in Colorado and other states, but as well in some of the agency labs, that the research security requirements in this bill that we're talking about could add to that requirement of time substantially. And I think we do have to balance our need for security with freeing up our scientists to do what they do best, which is think, discuss, and innovate. So would DOE support taking a more holistic interagency approach to this overall topic so that we could maybe streamline some of what the reporting requirements are?
Well, that's exactly where we're going. That's exactly where we're going, because we can't afford to have people wasting their talent on the fact that this agency does something different than this agency does something, and this agency. Now, most people that are funded by to do their science can't survive on one grant. They have 2 or 3. I've always had, in my program, I always had 2 or 3. And so, and there's paperwork associated with each of those, and there's rules associated with each of those. And so if now with the security issues, you also have to have practices in place that are different for all 3, it's not going to work, and people are going to figure out how to get through, wiggle their way through the, the lowest barrier. So I think it's really important that the agencies working together, and that's what we are doing, is trying to work across agencies. As you may recall, I served on the National Science Board before I took this position for 10 years, and they understand this issue too.
Right.
So absolutely.
Well, if we can be of any help, obviously I think I speak for many senators when I say that we would work diligently to try and systematize and integrate all this reporting requirements.
We'll take your help. We'll take your help. Because it really does need to be agency-wide. It needs to be agency-wide.
Thank you. I yield.
Thank you. Senator Langford.
Senator Brasso, thank you. I do want to associate myself with, as well, the opening comments that you and the chairman both made today on our energy and our responsibility to what's happening in Ukraine right now and to Europe. They are in need of energy resources quickly. And I know while there's been comments of some to say, let's do some work so that we can provide resources for them in the next 10 to 15 years, they can't wait the next 10 to 15 years. They need some help right now. And so if there's research and ways, if there's permitting changes that can be done to be able to increase the capacity for the United States to be able to provide energy issues there, be very, very helpful. Also wanted to be able to say there's several good bills that are in this dialogue today, but one of them is one of the just what I would affectionately call a nuisance bill. It is a bill where Congress wrote up whistleblower protections for the Department of Energy and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. Thought we made it pretty clear, and some creative attorneys are now reinterpreting it and saying, no, the whistleblower protections are not the same in that. And so we are providing clarity to be able to make sure there's whistleblower protections there in the way the text is actually written to make it very, very clear that this is what we intended to be able to provide. And so we're working our way through that.
Oh, that's great. That's great to hear.
Glad to be able to get that. Glad to be able to get that. Senator Brasso made a comment as well earlier just about the lack of variety in locations for investment. There's a bill that's obviously we're dealing with today as well that says not less than 10% of the research funding goes to this set of states, which they get very little research funding in the days ahead. My concern is that becomes a ceiling rather than a floor. And so I would only encourage us as we get this implemented to be able to make sure it doesn't become well, there's no more than 10% goes to those states and the other 90% still get it, since the vast majority of these other institutions get it. My question to you really is to be able to follow up on some of the things that Senator Barrasso was talking about as well. And that is the actual advisory committees and the selection groups that actually select where grants are going to go. It seems interesting to me that there seems to be in many of these selection groups for grants, a group of folks that, let's say 8 of the 10 of them graduated from Harvard or Berkeley or wherever it may be, and Stanford, and then amazingly, the research grant goes to that university as well disproportionately. And so it ends up, I understand, they have a loyalty where they came from, they've got a lot of relationships with faculty there, and they trust the research that's coming out of there. But we've got to find not only ways to be able to increase variety in the advisory groups, but also increase variety in the actual selection of where grant dollars go and how we're actually investing those dollars of not just the state that they're from, because we may have variety of states, but the same institutions end up getting the investment research dollars over and over again when there are other institutions around the country that also have creative ideas. And as you know very well from science, there's a great benefit to getting new ideas into the mix rather than the same group circling around the same research again.
Thank you, Senator Langford, for those comments, because they're very thoughtful. Let me say just a few things about that. The advisory boards themselves that are not really so intimately involved in making the decisions about where the grants go.
Right.
That really falls on the program officer getting reviews from a contingent of reviewers. And those, I have to say that those reviewers are usually from quite a diverse group of institutions. And so the Office of Science works very hard at that. National Science Foundation works very hard at that too. Getting enough reviewers to do all this work is always a challenge. And so what I recommend when I go visit smaller institutions that have less research, what I recommend is to have faculty there volunteer in those other institutes, volunteer to be on those committees, because the program officer is delighted to see someone volunteer, because that's where you learn how the process works. That's how you can put input on other institutions like yourself. So it's really one where we have to make sure that, and I do believe that we're doing a good job of that. It's just that even if you have people on the committee that are from a wide distribution of institutions, you know, they're going to see a place like MIT and say, woo, and versus, you know, another institution. And so they have to not have biases that way, right, too. And so you increasingly are seeing agencies, including the DOE, talk about not only conflict of interest, so you have to declare, right, any conflict of interest, but also get away from these biases that are so inherent in what we were doing. Now, can I tell you one more thing? And that is that what is amazing is that we recently did a study with regards to mentorship of graduate students in chemistry of the top 100 universities, top 100 chemistry departments in the country. What's the quality of mentoring of your graduate students that's done there? Broke it up into the top 10 rated by how much money they get and so forth. So, who do you think got rated the worst in terms of mentorship? Top 10. So we need to have a way, and that then goes to retention. So we need to have a way, and this is what I'm really working on. So we need to have a way for universities to report what their retention rate is of their graduate students and the demographics of those graduate students, so we can identify which institutions are doing the best job at mentoring students. Right. The ones that are up here, 50 to 100, they're doing a much better job. Right. Smaller groups, more attention. Now, that's just for chemistry, but I think it's things like that we need to put into place to have those that are in the other, you know, rated higher, rated, lower, the number, that they get recognized for really putting out good students and mentoring them, because that's the retention that is going to fuel what we're doing. Right.
That's why I raised the issue on the advisory committees and the selection groups, mm-hmm, because what I want to follow up on is what Senator Barrasso was saying. The advisory committees are important, but if it's the same group of folks, yep, making the selections over and over again, they're going to return grants back to the same locations where they have relationships, they visited it, they were there last year to be able to see what happened, they talked to those folks that were there last year and they know they're doing good work, and so they continue to accelerate dollars there. You're right, there's good work going in lots of other places, they just don't know it. And so it's expanding that, whether that is creating rotations, whether that is creating term limits for those individuals. They can only do it X number of years. And I've talked to folks in the research area, they say, well, we can't do that because there's a limited number of people. But there are ways to be, there are folks all around the country. It's just a matter of recruiting them and knowing that there is going to be an opening and getting more faculty to be able to step up and be able to volunteer, to be able to engage with it. I agree with both. I'm just saying it's putting in the structure to be able to make sure that we do break this cycle, yeah, to look at more research in more places.
Yeah, but I do think that in the Office of Science, we do work very hard at that. I mean, I've been down here and now up here, and so I've seen things go through. Everything can be improved. You can always improve things. But on the other hand, I feel very good about the commitment of the program officers that I've worked with over the years to really put together a diverse team of reviewers. But it's also age, right? Because the younger people that you get into that get on those review panels, they learn how the system works, right? And so even the age demographics is really important.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Senator Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. and thank you for holding this hearing today. Dr. Richmond, thank you for testifying today. As you know, we're facing a serious microchip shortage all across the country, the planet, in fact. At the same time, China is working very hard to outcompete American leadership in microchip research and development. To address these challenges, I worked with Republicans and Democrats to negotiate a $52 billion plan to boost American microchip manufacturing. This plan passed both the Senate and the House and is headed to conference, which is a good thing. But I believe we have to do more, including within DOE. We must ensure that the next generation of microchips are designed and manufactured right here in the United States, not somewhere else. And if anyone can engineer a solution to the challenge of continuing to fit more circuits on a chip, I'm confident that it's going to be American scientists and American engineers. And I understand that DOE national laboratories have existing microelectronics research programs, but they do not have explicit authorization from Congress, and I'm working on a bill to fix that. My bill would also promote workforce training and technology transfer programs at DOE. I encourage the administration to support my bill once it's introduced. Dr. Richmond, how could congressional authorization for microelectronics research and development programs at the Department of Energy support and accelerate work already being done by the department?
Well, thank you, Senator, for that question, because that's a biggie, and that's an important one, and it is urgent. It is urgent. You know, for decades, the Department of Energy has been on the leading edge of microelectronics, both as a consumer as well as an engine of scientific discovery in this area. So, and DOE supports this robust research portfolio that on issues at their scientific facilities, as well as chemical, physical, mathematical, computers, science, all of these areas in modeling and simulations. We've been on the forefront there. So, but we need to have more funding in order to make this happen. So, you know, when you talk about in areas of, because it's the whole range, it's material science, it's chemistry, it's processing, it's fabrication, and it goes all the way from the very fundamental research to actually putting it in your computer or whatever or your phone or whatever it is. And that's what the laboratories have in place right now. It's a matter of being able to fuel that with more funding, but smart funding that really goes after the key issues that we have to get at in order to pack more stuff on that chip. But you know, there's something that is so important to understand with regards to microelectronics, and you probably understand this, and that is they're no longer microelectronics like micron size, they're nano electronics, right? And so you're talking about, you know, if you're going to put this roadmap on your chip, you know, and pack stuff in there, but you got to be working on this teeny tiny scale. So how are you going to do the etching? How are you going to do all of this if you don't have the tools to be able to figure out whether you're doing it and what it looks like after you did it? And so what's really cool about in this particular areas is our big light source facilities, for example, they're able to see what your etch looked like. They're able to then, and so the companies go in and can test some procedure in order to do their chip. Then they can go to the facility, check out what happened, and go back and forth with the facility. There's no place else that you can do that but at the DOE labs. And so, but in this case, it just means being able to have more collaborative efforts with industry, because having a consortia of industry would work really well that way. And so beefing that up too, because they're coming in to use the facilities and having staffing to be able to help them with it. So there's just a lot of stuff going on for test beds as well as taking it all the way. It's an
Well, yeah, we want to fix that, and we want to make sure that we're not going to be testing our chips over in China as well.
You bet.
And, I mean, I don't think folks realize this, but the chip in this phone, it's a square centimeter, 2.5 billion transistors on it, 2.5 billion. We need to get that to 5 billion, but it needs to be made here in the United States, not somewhere else. And that's why the CHIPS Act and, you know, the legislation just making us more competitive with China is going to go a long way to bringing a lot of this manufacturing capability back to the United States. We've got to get this across the finish line. We've got TSMC, Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, building right now a fabrication facility in Arizona, Intel Building 2. are going to be underway soon, and this is going to help us get back towards, might not get us the whole way, but we went from 40% of chip production, global supply of chips that we manufacture down to about 12% today. We've got to reverse that. But more than that, we've got to be making the best chips in the world.
And we've got to be on the innovation front in terms of the next stage. What is the next stage, and can we beat everybody else to it? And what does concern me is that in China, you have all these, so we have our laboratories, and they're aging, right? And we need the infrastructure to build them up because China's building all new laboratories modeled after ours, including our light sources and other facilities, and they're all going to be brand new. So it's going to take a bit to build it, but you know, we have to be competitive. Our capabilities in our laboratories have to be competitive, stay competitive in order to be ahead all the time.
And then, Dr. Richmond, then we need the scientists and engineers to work in these facilities. So we need to encourage STEM education starting at a very young age and help young people get the education they need for these good paying jobs.
Absolutely true, but we need to do something else too. And that is that we need to make sure that that going into graduate programs, they can afford to go to graduate school. So right now, our graduate stipends that we offer are basically minimum wage. I just saw Target saying it's going to pay $25 an hour to work at Target. That's more than we're paying our graduate students in their 20s, doing the best research in the world. And we're asking them to work 80 hours a week, making basically minimum wage. We have to get those stipends through all agencies up to at least $45K a year. We have to do that. And it's particularly important for our underrepresented minority students because a lot of times they come to graduate school with debt. And they can't afford to stay in graduate school. The retention rate is much lower for them, and for women too. And so we have to figure out how to keep them in there, but also pay them a decent wage so that they can spend their 20s maybe saving a little bit of money, or maybe having a couple of kids too, like normal in your 20s, because you can afford to do that. So I'm just passionate about that issue too, because I think we just can't afford to do this anymore.
Well, thank you. And I yield back the 2 minutes extra I took.
Thank you very much, Senator Kelly, and thank you, Dr. Richmond. We're very grateful for your time and your the excitement that you bring to the office. The enthusiasm is notable and appreciated, and members are going to have until the close of business tomorrow to submit additional questions for the record, and if there's nothing else, this committee stands adjourned.
Thank you.